Hi everyone, this is DBaird speaking and welcome to Module 12B. My research paper concerns the symbolism that is contained within L. Frank Baum's book, The Wonderful Wizard of Oz. The Wonderful Wizard of Oz is a very much loved American fairy tale. It was written by Lyman Frank Baum and it was published in 1900. The book was an instant hit and it's been made into a musical as well as the Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer film of 1939 starring Judy Garland. Over the years, the book and its characters have been attributed a number of social, political, economic and spiritual symbols. This presentation will explore those symbols within the historical context of the day and will conclude with some of the most plausible explanations for these theories. The Wonderful Wizard of Oz chronicles the adventures of a small Kansas farm girl, Dorothy Gale, as her home is transported from the dull grey plains of Kansas to the mystical, colourful, incredible land of Oz. There she travels with her small dog Toto and 3 companions to seek out the powerful Wizard of Oz in the Emerald City, which is located in the centre of the country. Each companion is seeking a gift from the wizard. Dorothy, a way to get home, the Scarecrow, a brain, the Tin Woodman, a heart, and the Lion, courage. The overriding moral to the story is that each companion already possesses everything they need, but they don't realize it. The wizard turns out to be a fraud, and Dorothy manages to transport herself home with 3 clicks of her heels, wearing the magic silver slippers that were given to her by the Good Witch of the North. 2 very different theories exist about the symbolism contained in the book. The first theory proposes a spiritual allegory originating with Baum's fascination with theosophy, the spiritual movement of the late 1880s that introduced Americans to the Eastern religions of Buddhism and Hinduism. Baum's wife Maud and his mother-in-law Matilda Gage were great believers in theosophy. And coincidentally, a Swami from India, Vivekananda, had lectured at the Columbian Exposition in 1893, which Baum had attended, and had created a sensation with his 4 yogas as a guide to leading an enlightened life. This lecture was also to be very influential in Baum's life. The second theory, made famous by Henry Littlefield, is that The Wonderful Wizard of Oz is an allegory for the economic and political climate of the day, particularly the populist movement. Baum had moved his family to the Dakota Territory in 1887 and, after a failed retail business, bought the local newspaper, the Aberdeen Saturday Pioneer, becoming the editor, writer, and sole proprietor. He could not have envisaged how hard life was to be in the Dakotas. The Homestead Act of 1862 had given access to small plots of land, around 160 acres, across the West, to eager would-be farmers, and the resulting over-farming would end in the environmental disaster of the 1930s, the Dust Bowl. During Baum's life, the farmers in the Dakota Territory faced wild swings in the price of wheat, exorbitant prices for rail transportation, and a lack of warehousing facilities for reserves in a depressed economy. There was a general panic in 1893 that resulted in 15,000 businesses failing, including 156 railroads and 594 banks, many of them in the West. Thousands left the Dakotas, Nebraska, Kansas, and Colorado trying to escape the economic depression, but also the drought that ensued. Let's begin the exploration of symbolism with Dorothy Gale, who is the heroine of our story. On the spiritual side, Dorothy's journey is a metaphor for transformation of consciousness. She is on a journey of self-discovery for her true self, and she represents the human spirit. She is forced to take this difficult journey, and she cannot do it alone. She is assisted by her small dog Toto, who guides Dorothy through the journey. He is described by one author, Evan Schwartz, as a spiritual guide, uniting both worlds of the story, just as the Eastern philosophy of totality speaks to the unity of space and time. A more grounded explanation for Dorothy is put forth by Gretchen Ritter, who sees her as representing the American spirit. She literally comes from the center of the country, being Kansas, and this is the American Gothic, where the true American character can be found. She is that character. Dorothy is gifted a pair of silver slippers by the Good Witch of the North, and these slippers are known to have certain unknown powers. Interestingly, the slippers were turned to red in the movie to improve the contrast with the yellow brick road they were following. Believers in the spiritual analogy put forward that in theosophy, one's physical and astral body are connected by a silver cord. Schwartz believes that it is this silver cord with special powers that inspired the silver slippers. The other analogy is more political and economic in tone. During the severe economic downturn of the 1890s, many farmers believed that they would be better served by underpinning the currency with silver as well as the accepted gold standard. One prevalent view is that the yellow brick road represents the gold standard and the silver slippers the silver standard. This view was invented by a teacher, Henry Littlefield, who freely admits he made up the metaphor as a way to teach his students. Littlefield goes on to connect the Wonderful Wizard of Oz with the populist movement, which we'll now explore further in our discussion in the role of the Scarecrow. The yellow brick road is the thoroughfare the companions must take to reach the Emerald City. Analysis of the meaning of the yellow brick road has spiritual as well as political overtones as to its symbolism. A central idea in Buddhism is the difficult path of tests and trials, and Schwartz sees the colour yellow as significant in that it is the colour of sunlight and the daily process of awakening and awareness, representing consciousness itself. He goes on to explain that only if one is fortunate enough to return from an arduous journey with newfound wisdom, compassion, and courage can one appreciate the higher meaning of home. Alternatively, the yellow brick road leads to the political centre of the land and can also be imagined as the road to Washington, D.C. According to the populists, Washington, D.C. was controlled by the money power and gold traders. And what of the land of Oz itself? It's presented as a wildly colourful and lush environment after the endless grey plains of Kansas. After describing Kansas, the Scarecrow questions Dorothy as to why she would even want to go back there. On an allegorical level, Oz is an abbreviation for ounces, literally the measure of gold or silver bullion. But Schwartz returns to Boehm's indoctrination into theosophy and believes that Oz was inspired by the concept of the mystical realm known as the astral. This is a plane of existence created by the uncontrolled use of imagination. The astral plane in Eastern religions can be accessed in the here and now, unlike heaven. And in later Oz books, there were actually 13 of them in all, Dorothy travels freely from Kansas back to Oz. He goes further to explain that Boehm may have coined the name Oz due to the shape of the letters, with the eternal circle of life's journey fused with the constant zigzag of the wandering soul. The three companions joining Dorothy and Toto are the Scarecrow, the Tin Woodman, and the Cowardly Lion. The Scarecrow is believed to represent farm culture and the brainless populists. The populist movement and its links to metaphors in The Wonderful Wizard of Oz is pervasive, and it's worth additional explanation. The populist movement is described as a rising third-party campaign of angry, disenfranchised plain people, or farmers, and to a smaller degree some factory workers. They were seeking to wrest power from bankers and business leaders. United under the banner of the People's Populist Party, these men and women sought fundamental economic change in order to break the power of concentrated capital. Specifically, they were looking to nationalize the railroads to prevent the price gouging behavior that was going on, a graduated income tax rather than a flat rate, and a decrease in immigration, believed to be responsible for unemployment. The Tin Woodman is believed to represent the factory worker, and the lion Perhaps the presidential candidate of 1896, William Jennings Bryan, who was known for his oratory powers. Alternatively, it's been suggested that the lion represents the Native American chief Sitting Bull, once called the Lakota lion. Later in his life, his actions saw his tribe believe him to be a coward and a living oxymoron. The three companions, together with Dorothy, also have a more spiritual metaphor. Schwartz describes them as the three realms of the astral: the lion, animal; the scarecrow, vegetable; and the Tin Man, mineral. Their goals, together with Dorothy's, reflects the four yogas of the Swami Vivekananda, detailing the four paths to oneself. The notion is compelling, as the four yogas are described by Schwartz as, firstly, to those who needed more knowledge or reason, the Swami would suggest the meditations of Jnana Yoga, the path of wisdom. To those who needed to purify their emotions to focus on love and compassion, the Swami would point to the way of Bhakti Yoga, the path of devotion. To those who expressed fear, that great cause of misery, the Swami would prescribe Karma Yoga, the path of courageous action. And to those who had trouble concentrating and achieving serenity, the Swami would tell about Raja Yoga, the path to inner harmony. The parallels to the gifts the companions seek are quite striking. The Wonderful Wizard of Oz relationship with the plight of Native Americans is a complicated one. The late 1800s was a period of great tension as white settlers pushed west, forming vast tracts of farmland. The Native Americans saw their traditions, their food sources, and their lands threatened, and they fought back savagely in a series of well-known battles, including the one at Wounded Knee Creek in 1890, in which several hundred Sioux men, women, and children were massacred. Boehm wrote several articles about the tensions in his newspaper, and he later regretted one article where he wrote, "Their glory has fled, their spirit broken, their manhood effaced. Better they die than live the miserable wretches that they are." The winged monkeys from The Wonderful Wizard of Oz are believed on a political level to represent the plight and the threat of Native Americans. After the demise of the Wicked Witch of the East, who controls the monkeys, the King Monkey explains their origins to Dorothy, and this closely resembles the story of Native Americans. Originally free-spirited and playful, the monkeys are close to nature and childish. Their demise is caused by their own misbehavior, which is immature and uncivilized. The response of the region's rulers includes the threat of extermination, but is softened by a more paternal and benevolent ruler to just exile and subordination. From a spiritual perspective, the winged monkeys are inspired by a Sioux myth. The Sioux believed that communication could be carried by the weather, and this myth includes gargoyle-like creatures with multi-jointed wings called the Wakinyan. What of their destination, the Emerald City, and the bestower of gifts, the great and powerful Wizard of Oz? The Emerald City was inspired by the World's Columbian Exposition in Chicago in 1893. By this time, Boehm had moved his family back to Chicago. The exposition was visited on the first day by over 250,000 people, after which attendance plummeted. The overriding feature of the buildings of the exposition was that they were white. When the light hit them, the effect was so blinding that the fairgoers took to wearing tinted eyeglasses. Boehm would later write, "If you did not wear spectacles, the brightness and glory of the Emerald City would blind you." The persona of the Wizard of Oz captures 4 influential people Boehm had come into contact with and who may have inspired him. Firstly, he was a wizard of pure wonder and imagination, possibly inspired by Thomas Edison. Edison had been lighting up America with his invention, the electric light bulb, during the 1880s, and had franchised his power system to hundreds of cities and towns. He had also shown a new invention at the Paris International Exposition in 1889, a machine that played recorded sound, which was an absolute sensation. Bohm had even referred to Edison as the Wizard of Menlo Park. Secondly, the wizard becomes horrible and mean, and insists that the companions destroy the Wicked Witch of the East before he will help them. Bohm writes, "Well," said the head, "I will give you my answer. You have no right to expect me to send you back to Kansas unless you do something for me in return. In this country, everyone must pay for everything he gets." Such a deal reflects the quid pro quo of capitalism, in particular a likely reference to the wealthy John D. Rockefeller, who suffered from alopecia. It was noted that the wizard had no hair upon his head. Thirdly, the great wizard is exposed as a fraud, a common con man who is incapable of bestowing the gifts the companions are seeking. This is likely a reference to P.T. Barnum, the showman, whom Bohm had become fascinated with for his sheer audacity at deceiving people and his outlandish sideshows. The self-proclaimed Prince of Humbug. Lastly, the fourth side of the wizard's character is revealed, likely inspired by the Swami Vivekananda and his lectures on the 4 yogas. The wizard bestows token gifts on the scarecrow, the Tin Woodman, and the lion, making it clear that they already possess what they want the most. Whether Lyman Frank Bohm intentionally inserted the various symbols discussed into The Wonderful Wizard of Oz is a matter of conjecture. Certainly he lived at a time in American history that supports many of the political and economic metaphors that have been put forward. At the very least, he was a political satirist and journalist who would have been tempted to give greater meaning to a children's book. In support of the spiritual allegory, it's well documented that theosophy was not merely a personal interest. Bohm's indoctrination into the cult, and that of his wife and mother-in-law, had been overseen by leading theosophist Dr. W.P. Phelan. When asked, Bohm insisted the book was a simple story, the original American fairy tale designed to entertain children. His wife Maud, after his death, was emphatic that it was written purely as a children's book with no deeper meaning contained within it. The more compelling allegory for me is the spiritual one, with its overriding theme of self-discovery via a difficult journey, of realizing that everything we need is already within us waiting to be accessed, the astral plane as a place of unbridled imagination and the ability to travel there and back at will, and the 4 yogas that represent paths to self-enlightenment. This resonates as a story told to children because it carries an important message without preaching, which is a common trope in many children's books. Even if Bohm did not explicitly reveal his intentions, he has likely built in some semblance of his deeply held belief system. It was a part of who he was, and he would want to keep that alive through his legacy, The Wonderful Wizard of Oz.